Hello, it's been a while again. Welcome back to Foreign Guy in the Barangay. This is my first video since August, I think, and much has happened and much remains the same. The hat remains the same. There have been breakthroughs, there have been breakdowns, but luckily there have been no breakups. Stick around, I'll bring you up to date.
Hello, please subscribe to Barangay in the Barangay.
Oh, fantastic. I mentioned in my last video that Melody has been in hospital. In microcosm of the way that Britain has become a country in which people are generally doing the bare minimum, or less if they can get away with it, Melody tried to get a GP appointment to discuss some back pain she was suffering. Now, a word about Melody. She doesn't take time off. In all the time we've lived here in the UK, the only occasions on which she has darkened the door of the medical centre in which it's rumoured that our doctors practice has been to receive flu jabs and such, and for women's screening things. Nothing more. So you would imagine that having gone to the trouble of calling to be seen by a doctor, the receptionist would figure out that the call was genuine and not someone on the hunt for a sick note to have an impromptu holiday. But no. By the time she managed to overcome their resistance, their stonewalling and their fobbing off, and she managed to get a doctor to examine her, the doctor took one look at her back and sent her to accident and emergency. There, in triage, she suffered a full-blown seizure and was rushed into surgery where they cut her back open and drained 100 ml of pus from an abscess that had formed as a result of a bacterial infection. She was then admitted and spent 8 days in hospital and a couple of months at home, unable to work while she recovered. And it's not over-egging the pudding to suggest that if her persistence had not paid off finally, and if she had accepted the GP's practice's attempt to fob her off with a prescription for painkillers and advice to stop bothering them with these unreasonable requests for them to actually do their job, the infection she was suffering would have soon resulted in full-blown sepsis, blood poisoning as we used to call it, and the possibility would have been that she might not have survived. Indeed, the symptoms she displayed by having a seizure were those of the onset of sepsis. That's how close she was to dying from their negligence. Naturally, this is now all in the hands of lawyers, and let's hope for a little bit of justice. And normally, we would just put down such a misfortune to experience and not be so vulgar and greedy as to chase compensation. But aside from the severe pain and discomfort that she suffered, the wanton abdication of their responsibilities, their negligence and their persistent refusal to take her seriously has resulted in us being out of pocket by thousands of pounds, as she was left unable to work for 2 months as a consequence. And as is the way in the UK, even though she's been with the same employer for over 5 years, she received nothing more than SSP, statutory sick pay of £91 a week, a derisory, next to useless amount of money on which to survive. Almost as soon as Melody was discharged from hospital and was able to be left alone safely, I began a pre-arranged 6-week version of my usual 2-week shift, covering one of the other night drivers on their 2 weeks, whilst they went on holiday, and then did my own 2-week shift again afterwards. Luckily, the extra income has helped us to overcome Melody's shortfall in income without needing to dip into the savings account, but of course it was impossible to add anything to it either. Now, I suppose we will soon be back to normal and ploughing great lumps of her wages into the savings account once again, and it's not unfair to say, though, that we have fallen behind in our target by a few £1,000s. To add all the medical palaver, it's been a funny 12 months as we were both in the Philippines in March on holiday. But then Melody went back for family reasons in April, and I went over to meet the architect in May and June. So, huge expense, tiny savings. Here's hoping for a return to normal ASAP. Speaking of the architect, lost in translation, Whenever I communicate with our architect, I have to try and remember that every word I say needs to be translated by him into either Tagalog or Cebuano and in the right tense and context. And it seems to me that he speaks good English but understands less. And I think I'm the same. As a Spanish speaker, I can put across my point of view fairly well, but I get lost at times when someone else is jabbering on at me. And perhaps our architects are similar when I jabber on at him. There's also all the allowances for differences in terminology and all of the construction techniques which are common in the West but almost unknown in Southeast Asia, and of course vice versa. And add to that the cultural differences, for example our Western understanding of the word deadline and the rather more approximate application of Filipino time. So conflict, confusion and cultural differences abound. Me, I'm a fully qualified, self-confessed, certified control freak, third Dan, and when someone tells me that everything will be ready by the end of the month, or let's say the end of a particular month, that month being last August, I innocently and naturally expected to have received everything promised by the end of August, or shortly thereafter. I'm not used to being on the cusp of November and still be waiting. And as a fully qualified, self-confessed, certified third Dan control freak, it's beginning to chafe a little. Bearing in mind the probability that there may be elements of the house design that I'd imagined that have been misunderstood, mistranslated or misinterpreted, the delays would be more understandable. But I went there to meet with them at the end of May to counteract the time difference, the language barriers, and to communicate exactly what I needed from them. And they agreed, made suggestions, understood what was required. Or so they said. Now I'm getting hot under the collar. My grand plan for how to get this done isn't conditional solely on me transferring money from my Scrooge McDuck bank vault to the architect's account and trusting the process. It's dependent on me getting the money together first. And all this delay is threatening my grand plan. And my grand plan is that we, having started on the project, manage to get this YouTube channel monetized, and the income from that, combined with the savings that we can make, ensure that we'll have sufficient funds in place for phase 2. Phase 1 being the construction of everything beneath feet level. For phase 2, I would come to the Philippines for good, never to return to the UK, and oversee the project as the light gauge steel frame is constructed, roofed, clad, insulated, dry lined, and the services installed and connected, windows installed and finishes applied. I'm hoping that by April or May 2027, Melody could come over to join me and we can fit out the house and begin the construction of the Airbnb cabins that would be our business going forwards. Or at least that's my perception. But then again, a control freak would say that, wouldn't they? Nonetheless, it's all a case of timing. Each stage is time critical and dependent on the previous stage being carried out on time. My plan is for the architect to secure the building permit by Christmas, which means the application needs to be submitted in early November, because I'm told that by December most Filipinos are completely disinterested in carrying out irrelevancies such as work. Instead, they are much more interested in daydreaming about the forthcoming Christmas reunion with their families, what pasalubong to buy for them and for whom, and the eternal search for 13 different types of round fruit for the New Year celebrations. Mundane tasks, such as securing a building permit, can wait until New Year. Now, all of the Philippines knows this already, and so a veritable tsunami of applications will be made in November to try and get it done before the Filipino juggernaut grinds to a halt. This in itself will cause delays, and so the earlier it gets submitted, the better. It is somewhat concerning, therefore, that my architect has not yet given thought to the cost of the retaining walls within his calculations, nor the type of retaining wall required, as he is yet to speak with a structural engineer regarding the subject. This is ringing alarm bells, because his suggestion of there being a need to redesign the original house was deemed necessary by him because of the sloping nature of the site, and it was him who explained that we would need to situate the new design between two retaining walls. Yet a full 5 months later, a structural engineer's opinion, advice and design has not been sought. Can anybody else hear those alarm bells ringing? The application for a building permit would quite naturally require such nitty-gritty details so that the municipality can be assured that the planned development isn't likely to slide down the hillside during the first rainfall or tumble onto the road and unalive the neighbour's carabao. Naturally, the municipality, faced with the aforementioned tsunami of applications, will be eager to reduce their workload at Christmas time by employing the process of sorting the wheat from the chaff, and will reject applications for such frivolous omissions as not having included for stuff like septic tanks or retaining walls. The alarm bells are quite loud, aren't they? And when the quotation provided to me appears to have been hastily put together in a 5 minutes round the kitchen table kind of way, they get louder and louder and louder. Now, it may be that a load of previous experience has allowed my architect the luxury of being able to guesstimate the cost of each phase of the construction process, i.e. excavation and site levelling, 80,000 pesos. Concrete and formwork, 120,000 pesos, etc. But he now tells me that he's working on the bill of materials, and if he's yet to establish how much concrete is required, how can he possibly have provided a quotation? I can't hear myself for the sound of these bloody bells. But it gets still worse. Long-term fans of this channel will know that right from the very beginning of this journey, I have been a great critic of Filipino CHB's concrete hollow blocks, made on site so as to save money and made on site with the cement quotient measured in teaspoons so as to save money. I'm not interested in saving money if the walls tend to dissolve or fall over at inconvenient moments. A lack of solubility and an unfailing ability to remain in an upright position is, to my mind, a minimum requirement of a wall. I have a similar aversion to the use of timber because in the Philippines the termite problem is simply terrifying in that they can destroy the structural integrity of a timber frame building in an afternoon, probably. And add to that pair of problems, Mother Nature in the Philippines tends to exhibit some pretty frightening psychotic episodes, flinging volcanic lava around in a tantrum, trying to burn down your brand new home, shaking the very earth beneath it to try and reduce it to piles of gravel, complete with an accompanying typhoon that will huff and it will puff and it will blow your house into the next province before you stop shaking from the tremors. So in my opinion, that leaves one option: steel. And to be specific, light gauge steel framing. Fireproof, floodproof, quakeproof, volcanic lava proof, termite proof, typhoon proof steel framing. And I've been banging on about this method of construction for around a year now. Indeed, I went to the Philippines 6 months ago and sat down with my architect to explain what I wanted: a light gauge steel framed house, computer designed, encompassing accurate geospecific calculations for wind loads during typhoons, for strengthening to counter earthquakes, and relying on analyses of historic volcanic and seismic activity, with the steel frame itself fabricated off-site into panels and protected by multi-layer applications of galvanization before any rust can develop, and only susceptible to science fiction grade robo-termites from the future. Way back in May, the architect nodded and expressed that he had experience in this field, which was naturally very, very assuring. However, he recently sent me through the plans for the house, more detailed and technical than the renders he had provided to date, and the rudimentary floor plan I'd received, and one of the drawings provided detailed the foundations. Specifically, it detailed the pad foundations with reinforced columns to support the I-beams. More red flags, more alarm bells. Light gauge steel framed buildings don't have I-beams, therefore they don't require pads or columns, just concrete filled mesh reinforced trenches beneath the walls, and not so deep trenches at that. The entire structure sits on the concrete pad with the load spread evenly throughout, rather than point loads which would require columns of reinforced concrete beneath each point load imposed by the I-beam. pads and reinforced columns and I-beams are much, much, much more expensive in every regard. Furthermore, columns and I-beams being thicker than the infill wall means that their shape is visible in the finished house, unlike a house built from light gauge steel framing. So I explained the situation to my wife, who up until recently has left everything to me with minimal input from her except to say that she wants a swim-up bar in the pool and an island in the kitchen. My wife is not a control freak at all, and she stood over my shoulder to make sure I wrote that down properly. She's not as knee-jerk as I am in any event and would normally exercise restraint and patience typical of a Filipino. But even she could hear the alarm bells. In short, if we don't get a response from this week in the form of a miraculous extraction of the digit, we're going to need to consider jumping ship. I've been made aware of another construction crew who will be available in January to begin the project. They also have an in-house architect. But whether or not it would be possible for him to take it over at this late stage, redesign the foundations, and also provide us with a bill of materials and an acceptable quotation, plus submit everything to the municipality for checking, is doubtful. And it certainly seems from our experience to date that getting a Filipino to comply with anything approaching a timetable is completely impossible. And any foreigner's anticipation of compliance with a deadline is a great source of mirth. Whether it would be an appropriate thing to do or a case of out of the frying pan into the fire remains to be seen. But in short, if this is anything to go by, it's no wonder that the Philippines struggles to compete among its Southeast Asian neighbours. Maybe it's me. Maybe I need to concentrate less on starting the phase 1 in January. Maybe it won't be vital that it begins then and it can wait a month. But we are committed to visiting the Philippines during March, and the entire phase 1 was supposed to be completed by the end of March. Leaving halfway through, or at least before the end, would seem a little strange, but perhaps even in that scenario, alternatives could be sought and implemented. I'm not sure what to do, and as a bona fide control freak, that's a distinctly uncomfortable position to be in. So this is a video without a conclusion. This next week will almost certainly come and go without resolution of the problems we face. And so, do I cut it off now or continue? Seriously, what's your advice? What would you do in similar circumstances? Additionally, would the incoming team be any better? Even if they were, how would it impact the planned schedule of works? The one thing I would ask of the viewers of this channel, those with an opinion, is you maybe let me know what you think. This is not going smoothly. But for those of you accustomed to the way things get done in the Philippines, should I back down or should I swing the axe? I'll be back with an update as soon as possible. Subscribe to the channel to find out what happens as soon as I release the next video. Thanks for watching. God bless and goodbye.